This girl is idle. Is she inefficient? We don't know. We're only making a casual observation.
Now, I doubt if any of us would judge this girl's performance from this one observation. But suppose our friend were a real secretary, and suppose I seldom saw her working. Could I then assume that she was a poor worker? Well, if I did, I would be doing what we all tend to do, forming our opinions from casual observations. And unfortunately, such opinions are not always dependable. Well, you might ask, how can you make a dependable evaluation of a person's work without spending a great deal of time observing and analyzing every move they make over a long period of time? Well, there is a way. It's a method by sample observations to provide an answer whose precision is known. It's a technique called random sampling, and I'm going to show you how it works. First, let's make sure the concept of randomness is understood. Now, in this bowl, I have a number of white and colored beads, and I'm going to stir them thoroughly so that each bead has an equal chance of being selected by the holes in this paddle. Since the paddle is impersonal, a random selection is ensured. This, then, can be called a random sample. Now, how is this random sampling useful to us? Well, there are exactly 10,000 beads in this bowl. By actual count, I know that 10%, or 1,000 of them, are colored, and the remaining 9,000 are white. Now, when I dip into this bowl, a sample of 50 beads is selected by the 50 holes in the paddle. The sample contains a large quantity of white beads and a smaller quantity of colored ones. If I were to draw many such samples, making certain each time that I replaced the beads previously drawn, the results would show that the samples containing 10% or 5 colored beads would occur most frequently. This is as we might expect, since the bowl contains exactly 10% colored beads. Now, here we have a chart. It's for a situation such as this, where 1 out of 10 beads is colored. It shows the theoretical relationship between the number of colored beads we expect to get in a sample of 50 and their frequency of occurrence. As you can see, 5 occurs most frequently. Numbers greater than 5 occur less frequently, and the further they get from 5, the less frequently they occur. And it works out exactly the same for numbers under 5. It is this predictable pattern that makes the technique of random sampling dependable. Now, in this example, the percentage of colored beads was known. In practice, of course, the actual percentage is the unknown that we're looking for. So, let's create an unknown situation by adding an unknown number of colored beads. Now we can use sampling to estimate the actual percentage of colored beads. Without counting them all. Because the percentage of colored beads in the random sample gives us a prediction of the percentage of colored beads in the whole. And so we have seen what randomness is, and how a random sample can be used to predict the whole. Now let's see how this technique can be applied to a work situation. Here we have a time scale. It's divided into forenoon, lunch, and afternoon. And it is further divided into hours and into minutes.
Each block is equivalent to 1 minute, and together they represent the 480 minutes in a typical 8-hour workday in the life of this drill press operator.
Now you've noticed that some of the blocks are colored and some are white. The white blocks represent the working time, and the colored blocks represent idle time. So we see that during this particular minute, our man was working. And during these particular minutes, he was idle. By means of a continuous observation procedure, such as an all-day time study, we could determine the amount of working time and the amount of idle time in this day. Instead of making such a 100% measurement, let us apply the concept of random sampling and see how, by the use of random samples, we can determine the percentage of the day the operator was idle and the percentage of the day that he was working. In the same manner that we use sampling to determine the percentage of colored beads and white beads in the bowl. Now, our first step is to decide at what times during the day we should make our observations. The observer could make his observations at times most convenient to him. But if he did, there would be no assurance of randomness. And randomness is the key to the success of our sampling technique. Experience has shown that it is only natural for an observer to have certain conscious or unconscious patterns of regularity that would tend to destroy this randomness that is needed. Therefore, we must have a system that ensures randomness, and it is just such a system that I would like to demonstrate. Now, in this hat, I have 480 pieces of folded paper, all of which look alike. Each one bears a number from 1 to 480. Each paper represents one of the 480 minutes in an 8-hour workday. Now, if I stir up the pieces and select one at random, I will have chosen an observation time which is not dependent on any factor other than chance. Now, in actual practice, the number of observations to be made will depend upon the precision we desire. We have statistical formulas to give us this information, but for the sake of demonstration, let's make only 40 observations of our drill press operator. By drawing 40 slips of paper out of this hat in a completely random fashion, we will have 40 random times at which to make our observations. We now have 40 random times at which to make our observations. Notice that the times we selected have no regularity of pattern. So, by picking papers out of a hat, each observation time was selected entirely by chance, and randomness was achieved. Of course, it might prove to be a little impractical for you to carry around a hatful of papers. Fortunately, we have available random number tables to guide in our selection of observation times. These tables ensure randomness and are much easier to use than a hat. Well, now that we have selected our times, let's make our observations. Now, here we find our drill press operator working. Here he's working. Here he's working. Still working. When we have completed all of the observations, we are ready to make our analysis. On the basis of this sample, we estimate the worker was idle 15% of the day. We can compare our findings with the actual situation by counting the total number of idle minutes in the entire day. And if you count them, you'll find there are 68. That means that our worker was actually idle 14 2/10% of the day instead of the 15% that we predicted. In this demonstration, we knew the actual makeup of the day before we started. In a true work situation, however, we would not know the answer before we started, but we would find it by work sampling, using our random samples to predict the whole. And in an actual work situation, we would use a simple data sheet. The observer simply tallies a mark in the proper category as he makes observations at predetermined times. Now we have seen how simple random sampling can be used to determine the percentage of idle time and working time in a given period. But it can do more. It can be used to analyze each of these categories. By sampling, we can break down and analyze the idle time, and we can also analyze the working time. For example, this colored block at 11:31 looks exactly like this colored block at 10:45. Each indicates an idle minute in the worker's day. But up to this point, we do not know whether the worker was idle because he went out for a drink of water or because he was out of material. But if the observer subdivides the delays according to their cause, he can determine what percent of the delayed time is attributable to each cause. Now let's analyze the productive time. During this working minute, the operator may have been able to drill 5 holes. On the other hand, during this working minute, he might have drilled only 4 holes. Now, if the observer rates the worker's performance level or pace each time he notes the operator working, the average performance index of the operator while working can be determined. So you see, we have a complete tool for measuring and analyzing work. If the methods are standardized, And there is a clear distinction between work and idle time. And if we record the actual production count during the period covered by the work sampling study, we have all the information necessary to establish a standard time for the operation. This technique of work sampling is particularly effective for measuring the work performed by an individual or a group employed on non-repetitive jobs, even where methods are not standardized and job descriptions are non-existent. This performance index of an individual operator or department can be determined.
It is possible to gather such information as standard hours of productive work, average performance index, and idle time and delay time, broken down into their various causes. All of these things can be done with the following advantages. Measurements can be made with a pre-assigned degree of reliability. No stopwatch or other timing devices are needed. Work can be measured, in most instances, in less time and at a lower cost than with time study. Studies can be conveniently made over a period of days or weeks, decreasing the effect of day-to-day or week-to-week variations. And the study may be interrupted at any time without affecting the results. And speaking of interruptions, let's stop for a moment and take another look at our secretary. Now she seems to be busy. Very busy. Does this mean that she is efficient? Well, we don't know. But in the work sampling technique, we have a convenient, easy, and dependable way to find out. And what's more, it can be used in such places as offices, factories, warehouses, hospitals, farms, schools, and so forth. And it should be useful in your situation, because work sampling can be used just about any place where you want to measure the activities of or machines.